to sit there. That's my point, is trying to.
I'm almost positive the folks that were appropriated these dollars want to spend those dollars.
Yeah.
They want to get into those communities that need the dollars to be expended. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, sir.
Chair now calls Mark Williams, Executive Director, and Stephen Stewart, Chief Financial Officer of the Texas Department of Transportation. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. So good morning, Chairman Wally, Vice Chair Lujan, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Mark Williams, and I serve as Executive Director for the Texas Department of Transportation. Thank you for the opportunity to be here this morning, and I'm also, as you noted, joined by our Chief Financial Officer, Stephen Stewart. So you all have a slide deck before you that we provided, and a number of those slides are the same as what we spoke about to the General House Appropriations Committee last week. So I won't spend a whole lot of detail on those, but we'll reserve some of the time for Stephen Stewart to go into more of the budget matters that certainly is the subject of this committee hearing today. So I'll start with slide 3 and just reiterate that we strive to address our mission of connecting you with Texas through the state's support of our vast transportation system. And we're very proud of the system that we maintain in many areas, be it highways and rail, ports, even aviation. We really stand alone on top compared to other states in terms of the size and the amount of goods and product and vehicles that are moved on our transportation system. And I'm very proud of the fact that in many of these areas, we do an outstanding job in maintaining those. And if you look at our condition ratings and scorings, be it the ones that we've maintained, ones that are maintained by the Federal Highway Administration, that reiterates that position that we work very hard to maintain our system and to put those funds that you provide us to effective and good use, and we appreciate that. Moving to slide 4, you'll see on this, and I spoke a little bit about this last week, that maintaining that transportation system is critical if we're going to keep up with the population and the employment boom that we have here in Texas. Based upon the state demographer's latest numbers, we had 1,500 new Texans a day that are part of our state. And along with that, based on the governor's report from the end of last year, about 800 new jobs are included in that growth. And we certainly appreciate that those goods and services and people rely upon our transportation system. One of the most important things that we do as an agency is deliver on the work and the improvement to that transportation system. And in terms of our project delivery efforts, the total amount of construction that we have underway now stands at a record $57 billion. And if you go back just a few years ago to 2014, well, 10 years ago to 2014, seems like a few years ago to some of us, that number was at $17 billion. So we've seen tremendous growth in the size of the program. That's thanks in large part to the ballot propositions, constitutional measures that were passed by an overwhelming number of Texas voters and supported by this legislature and the governor for Propositions 1 and Proposition 7. And Stephen will talk about the impact of those on our programs here shortly. But not only are we delivering that work and actively doing it, last year was a record $13.7 billion, but in the future going forward, we maintain a 10-year unified transportation plan. And that is our planned program of funded projects over the next 10 years. That currently stands at $104 billion. And also I wanted to mention again and thank the legislature. Last year, about $1.4 billion in multimodal transportation projects were funded through this body, and that went toward maritime and aviation in particular, but also public transit and rail. Moving on to slide 5, I want to highlight just the funding and budget planning considerations that TxDOT took into consideration as we submitted our LAR and what was reflected in House Bill 1. Inflation is a primary driver of cost increases these days, and if you look at our highway cost index going back to just 2020, the cost of delivering transportation projects has increased by 62%. So what took us $1 to build back in 2020 now takes $1.62 to build. That has been something that has been endemic nationwide. And so Texas is not alone in that area. A lot of different factors that are driving that. And just in the last 12 months alone, highway construction costs increased about 9.5%. So that rate has slowed a bit, but it still is outpacing where we would really want to see it at. On the federal funding side, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act expires in September of 2026. So we're engaged with our federal elected officials and other partners at the federal level, looking at what that reauthorization bill might involve. We get about 35% of our funding that comes to us through the federal authorization that we get primarily from the Federal Highway Administration. Non-dedicated state highway funds are very important. Those are the most flexible dollars. Many of those go toward the work that we do that is not able to be done through the constitutionally dedicated dollars for our state highway systems. Many of those multimodal projects that we talked about earlier, those have to be funded through either non-dedicated fund sources or general revenue. Our non-dedicated fund sources is just 1% or about 1% of our overall budget. Our employees are delivering today more dollar-wise and even adjusting for inflation, more delivery is occurring than we ever have. We're about 36% more productive today than we were in 2011. And a lot of that comes about through just the efficiencies, the technologies that you all have helped invest in that help make us more efficient, and we continue to remain focused on that. One important area that we've also worked on that has been part of our project delivery effort has been addressing the cash balance. So as we saw over the past couple of years with some of the growth in Prop 1, Prop 7 funding, we saw a rapid increase in our funds. Also, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act had an increase in our federal funds. And so we saw growth in our cash balance that exists in the State Highway Fund. That stood at about $10 billion. Today, that is less than $5 billion. And so we are working to execute and expend those resources and see that moving forward, that will continue as we see that $57 billion worth of construction, one, is going to continue to grow. Well, I expect that it'll probably get to about $60 billion here over the next several months. And those funds will continue to spend out over time. Turning to slide 6, I want to just briefly touch on how we focus on the delivery of our transportation system. We rely upon our people, employees, and contracting community and capital items. The vast majority of construction work that we do put out is through contracted resources, where we don't do the construction ourselves. We put that out through contracted resources. The majority of our project development and delivery efforts are through contracted resources. And so that's very much part of the team that we work with to deliver that. But you'll also see the funding sources that we rely upon. And one of the items that the LBB touched on that we have to respond to as we see our cash balances going down and the delivery of projects going up is we have to keep a very close eye and be very attuned to the fluctuations in those anticipated revenues going forward, because those anticipated revenues are anticipated to pay off these bills on projects that have been let and awarded. And as those revenues might change or those revenue estimates might change, we have to be prepared to make adjustments. And so one of the things that was that came about last month was a change in the forecast of some of our revenues. And so our revenues across the board for 25, 26, and 27, the remainder of 25 and 26 and 27, were adjusted downward by about $1.1 billion in the latest biennial revenue estimates. And so we have to constantly be ready to respond to that, to make adjustments in our contracting and what we do to ensure that we're delivering effectively and in a fiscally responsible manner. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Stephen Stewart, and he will begin on slide 7 and step you through more of the details on our budget and funding proposal.
Good morning. For the record, Stephen Stewart, Chief Financial Officer at Texas Department of Transportation. So as we continue with slide 7, we'll focus on the sources of funding. Here you'll see highlights what's included in HB1, which is nearly identical to TxDOT's legislative appropriation request. Unlike most DOTs, our state highway dollars make up the majority of TxDOT's funding. Federal funds make up the largest individual portion of the funding at over $12 billion, but while federal funds make up 30% of TxDOT's funding, Proposition 1 and 7 comprise approximately 40% of the department's funding. Adding in traditional funding, such as motor fuel tax and vehicle registration tax, gets us to the 67% of the budget. Moving to slide 8, this refers to the uses of funding. The largest pieces of the pie related to project development and delivery. Focusing in on that, you'll see that 89% goes towards developing, delivering, and maintaining, which is the core function of the department. And then moving over to slide 9, you'll see the comparison of TxDOT's capital budget request in comparison to HB1. TxDOT's very grateful to the legislature and this committee for committing to funding of our entire capital funding request, including IT and building maintenance. You'll notice the transportation items are not funded here, but Article 9 shows a commitment to funding our capital transportation items in the supplemental budget bill. And then moving on to slide 10, this provides a list of TxDOT's exceptional items. We'll focus on the FTEs on the next couple slides, and you'll find more detailed description of each of the multimodal requests in the appendix. And then for these exceptional items, it's important to note that with the exception of the FTE request, these are items that require general revenue. As Mark mentioned, that 98% of our funds are constitutionally dedicated to developing, delivering, and maintaining the system. And the remaining 2% is already programmed towards other priorities or TxDOT's current multimodal programs. Moving to slides 11 and 12, here we'll focus on TxDOT's district operations that have significantly increased over the past 10 years, and TxDOT's been delivering on the record transportation program. However, while our transportation program has increased by 300%, our FTE cap is down about 7% from when TxDOT took it upon itself to turn back about 2,000 positions to the legislature prior to Proposition 1-7 funding. When we were approaching a fiscal cliff that was leveraging bond funding at the time. TxDOT's requesting a 2% increase in FTEs, which is about 299 additional FTEs, since 2 of those from the 301 were included. TxDOT has aggressively increased its letting schedule over the last several biennium, more than tripling the UTP from approximately $34.5 billion in 2015 to $104 billion in 2025. We believe that the most efficient way to bolster the delivery of TxDOT's $57 billion worth of ongoing projects and ensure taxpayer dollars are being used wisely is through the FTE request. FTEs safely and efficiently manage the increase of delivery of projects. No additional funding is being requested for the FTEs, which would be absorbed within the State Highway Fund, where we manage those funds and deliver projects based upon those revenue sources. So it would not cost the HB1 bill. So let me turn it back over to our Executive Director, Mark.
So just to conclude, one of the things that we like to touch on, and we certainly appreciate, and I know that you all do too, is the important safety aspect of what we do. And sitting here today, thus far this year, we've lost 371 motorists on our highways. We lose around 11 per day on average. Last year, we lost 4,150 motorists. Now, while that was a decrease from the year before, we have a long way to go, and very much appreciate the support and the attention that you all help us with when it comes to highway safety. And so with that, Chairman Wally, I'd be happy to answer any questions from the committee.
Thank you, Mark. Ms. Stewart. I saw all the lights. So we're going to try to be judicious here, and who started their who lit their light first? Because I think all of them are going to be lit. All right, Representative Villalobos.
Thank you, Chairman. Okay, from Corpus Christi, we have the Harbor Bridge project in my district, initially scheduled to be completed in 2020. There was a lot of engineering concerns, therefore a large delay. It should be completed this year. Excellent. As you stated in your presentation, inflation has been crazy since that time, up 62%. Just in the past year alone, 9.5%. Where can I find the stat of time is money? So any projects that delayed off the original schedule, that's additional funding that is now needed for that project. Where can I find the statistics on how your projects are performing from the baseline and how many additional taxpayer dollars are going towards those projects?
Well, it oftentimes depends upon when, the time starts. So, when we award a contract, then at that point of award, that's what the contractor bids, and the contractor bids into their price, what they anticipate the inflation to be. So by and large, the price of those projects are set at the time of award. Now, in certain instances where there's unexpected delays or things that come up, that's where we have to negotiate, changes to those amounts. But the majority of our contracts, once those are bid, then those contracts, those prices are in place. The highway cost index, as it is, that's what tells us if a project has not been bid and we're starting to look toward the future, that's kind of telling us the rate at which the cost of those projects are increasing if they have not been let to contract. I'm sorry, you had a question or comment.
Yeah. Do you see a large amount of change orders given society today with the amount of inflation that's happening from those initial contract bids?
Well, the contractors can't submit a change order just because of a change in the contract bid.
Correct.
They're responsible to account for that at the time of bid. So that alone would not generate a change order. But we are seeing an increase in the cost of delivering our transportation projects. And like I said, what we probably would have expected to award for hypothetically $1 back in 2020 now takes us $1.62 if we are going to award that same contract today.
Correct.
And Stephen, you had.
Yeah, I was just going to add that, we do work with the contracting community, and we also work with our engineers in order to establish what that estimate is. And we do look at current costs and try to estimate what those future costs are based upon that highway cost index. And so the contractors do that as well. When the inflation was extremely high, that was definitely a challenge. So that's why we're thankful that the inflationary impacts have come down a little bit, but they're still part of that estimate that we expect to see.
And we try not to be, we work to understand what those drivers are and where we may have flexibility in the design and the development of our projects to use to potentially alternative materials in the design of those projects. In those instances, we're seeing, changes in one versus the other, maybe concrete versus asphalt or different types of steel products. We try to factor that into the design and the level of development of those projects. So contractors can have flexibility on the materials that are used, and we can do what we can to encourage as much competition as possible.
Yeah, I guess if I could find it online, or if you can send my office, the amount of projects that have gone past their base construction timeline schedule in the last 5 years, and then in the last biennium, how many change orders the department has received.
We'll be happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Collier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to piggyback on Representative Villalobos' questions about the change orders, because I agree that could increase the cost, and I appreciate you explaining that just because the cost went up doesn't justify a change order, but the availability of supplies with that, and then they have to come up with an alternative, which could cost more. Is that right?
It could, but again, most of those are established at the time of bid. So when the contractor is working to put together his or her bid on a project, they are working with material suppliers and the availability of those materials. Now, from time to time, if a contractor gets into a situation where one particular material was bid and it becomes unavailable for some reason, we can research that and validate that and then work with the contractor if there is an equal substitute for that. But in many of those instances, the contractor is still responsible for their price.
Now, what about workforce shortages? Does that drive up the cost a little bit more if there's any shortages in workforce?
Workforce, material prices and workforce shortages and then inflation in equipment. Those have been the three drivers that have affected what I referred to previously as the highway cost index.
And just wanted to get this out because I have wonderful communications with my local district tech stock representatives, and they, provide updates, and I have, good calls with them about the road projects that are happening in Tarrant County. And when I call on them about some safety issues that my district may bring up about a tree maybe being overgrown or maybe grass needing to be cut, which could impact sight, or parking in a TxDOT right-of-way, I appreciate them being able to respond swiftly and to implement the safety measures that are needed. So they have been able to do that based on your maintenance fund, and I want to make sure that when I call or if somebody else calls, that they can do those things in response to an ask because of the safety for the public. And I want to thank you for making sure that we have money in the budget to do that and to respond to the needs of Texans and to protect our safety. So I appreciate that very much. So I want to go to your exceptional items.
Yes.
I know you asked for these because there is a need for these things. And I want to talk about your local rail grade crossing separations. And we've had a death in Harris County, I believe.
Yes, there was, and what this request is $350 million that would go toward our ability to work with local communities off system. So much of our exceptional item requests are oriented toward projects and programs that cannot be funded with traditional state highway funds. So they would be either non-dedicated or general revenue that would be required for those. And so because these fall on local streets in many areas, those are local off-system projects that we're continuing to see some not only increased congestion, but also increased safety issues related to rail highway grade crossings or local grade crossings with local streets. And one of the things that we have heard from the local communities and from the railroads themselves is the lack of available dollars to put toward those programs. And so we would envision this program being a grant application program, and where we would want to work to try to, in addition to the funds that the legislature may want to authorize, that we would seek to leverage local and even private participation to grow the capacity of that program, to implement projects to grade separate rail and highway crossings.
Well,
And there was a fatality, I think it was related to a young man that went to Houston Milby High School a while back. But tragically, he's not alone. We see those around the state, and this would hopefully help to mitigate that as well.
right, absolutely. So I appreciate that and the request because it's very thoughtful and it helps improve our infrastructure. So thank you so much for that. And then when you're evaluating the needs of, the request, are you looking at like concrete life, like over our road system? You're saying, oh, this has been there for 40 years. It's time to do some upgrades to our concrete or to this road system. Those are things that which can adjust the LAR. Is that right?
Right. We do, and we publish a pavement condition report that comes out every year where we go through and systematically assess the quality and the condition of our pavements around the state. One of the things I'm very proud of is that is at the highest level it's ever been reported. Still, if you drive around, you can find problems on our highway that still need to be addressed, so there's still work to do. But that does two things for us. One, it allows us to, as you said, set our request, and that affects some of the work that we put into the maintenance program. But it also helps to inform us as we're developing projects and rehabilitation so that we can schedule and adjust those accordingly. As we go through the winter season, we often see changes in those pavements because of the freeze-thaw cycle. And so we sometimes need to make sure that we're having very up-to-date information on those pavement conditions. And that's where our districts come in working very closely to understand their systems and to schedule and prioritize those needs.
So I guess if I was trying to bring it home from in my mind, it's like I can patch my roof, but I probably need a new one. And so that's what you're looking at the roads. Like I can keep filling these potholes, but we just need to go ahead because it's going to cost us more money in the long run by just doing these, temporary fixes.
Yes, we have what we call routine maintenance, which is the patching and the temporary repairs that we have to try to preserve the life of that pavement. But then we move into full-scale overlays and rehabilitation that often takes place.
Okay. And again, when I think about TxDOT, I'm just thinking of roads, but it's the ancillary things like bridges. You help with the bridges, the railroad, the ports. I mean, there's so many things that are involved and that you're responsible for that help us to have safe, to help, have so it can be safer for Texans. Because, when I think about the grass, I didn't think that was your responsibility, but it is when it's on a state highway.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
So even, cutting the grass to fill in potholes to replacing a whole roadway is part of your, jurisdiction.
Yes, ma'am. And, one of the things I touched on last week in my testimony is that not only do we have that project delivery responsibility, but we also have a very important customer service responsibility. The impact of a growing population does unfortunately contribute to more trash and debris on our roadways that we have to work to get out and respond to. It also contributes to just more demands for things like permits and utilities that go into our right-of-way and being able to respond to permit requests. And so not only, do our teams work on the delivery and the traditional work that you see on our state highway system, but it's also those types of customer service needs that we're seeing continue to grow as our state continues to grow.
And they cost money.
It does.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Berry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's great seeing you guys again. And I too have received a lot of great work from you guys in our district in Brazoria County. I thank you for all that. My questions are geared, in this particular case, geared towards rail. We have an actual situation in our county where in the last 12 months, we've had 23 accidents on a single rail crossing. And that rail crossing is an elevated rail crossing. And back in the day, y'all used to put them on big humps. Well, we've had 18-wheelers high center on this particular rail crossing. As a result, we've had one fatality over the last couple of years, but we've had 23 accidents over the last 12 months. How do we work with your office to escalate issues of this sort when it comes to public safety?
Well, that is the type of information I want to make sure I get specific information on the location of that.
Yep.
I believe our district engineer will probably be here this week sometime. I'd like to make sure that he has an opportunity to visit with you and we can get an understanding on the specific issues associated with that location. But we want to look and see if the funding eligibility for that, if that's on system or off system. I'm assuming it may be on our system and one that we need to be able to look at what we can be doing to address. We also have to work in many instances with the railroad companies themselves. They have a responsibility with us for those crossings. I'm not at all passing the buck to them, but it is an area where we have to jointly work with them on signaling and the preemption and everything that goes into something like that.
Now, I completely understand the coordination of efforts between all the different agencies, and I appreciate that. We'll take it offline and start working through that. It kind of leads into my second question about coordination. In my district, I have, adjacent to my district, I have the Houston Ship Channel, and as part of my district, I have Port Freeport. Port Freeport has recently gone through some widening, deepening sort of endeavors so that they can bring in more products. We've, through some of the efforts of our port commissioners, reduced our M&O tax rate to 0 in an effort to bring in more revenue through, services and whatnot. When it comes to coordination and offloading of materials from these ports, how much effort do y'all put into looking at surrounding access and egress from these ports so that they don't necessarily impede the current day-to-day flow of everyone going, commuter work and things of that sort?
Well, there's two areas I'll touch on. One, the legislature several sessions ago created what was called the Port Authority Advisory Committee. And the director of the Port of Freeport, I believe, is currently the chair, Phyllis Sathoff, or she has recently been the chair of that committee. But the ports are represented on that committee. In addition, there's an appointed member from the lieutenant governor and the speaker and the governor that serve on that committee. And that is an important point of coordination. While we also do work with the ports themselves, all of our districts work very closely with their ports on the operational needs. But that Port Authority Advisory Committee serves to help synthesize some of these issues and bring them up. But they also have an important responsibility in helping to provide guidance to our port access funding program. So one of the things that there's really three areas that the legislature has authorized funding to. One has been the Ship Channel Improvement and Revolving Fund. The other has been the Port Capital Fund. So the Ship Channel Revolving Fund deals with deepening and widening. And there were two projects that were awarded out of the funds that you all authorized last legislative session. As Stephen talked about, we're asking for another $200 million in that program for this current biennium. There's the Port Capital Program, which goes toward funding work that is inside the gates of the port, on the port itself. And that can include a wide range of things, docks, wharves, rail crossings, warehouses, gantry cranes, a wide range of things on that. And then there is the port access funding, which is about $40 million a biennium, and that goes toward roadway improvements leading up to and in and around the ports. And the funding for those is not exclusively limited just to that. If they fall on the state highway system, then we can also fund that through the Unified Transportation Program. But all three of those efforts are ones that are closely coordinated with and guided by the Port Authority Advisory Committee, working in conjunction with our staff and then overseen by the Texas Transportation Commission.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative.
Thank you, Representative Harrison.
Yeah, thank you. Thank y'all very much. Question where I started with the LBB on teleworking, just roughly total FTE count and just any kind of approximation you can give us for adherence to your, I think you said you have it across the board hybrid telework policy. Is that correct? And
Sure. Let me address that. And I believe there was some data that was reported and submitted through the LBB for all the agencies, and we can certainly provide you with what we submitted to them in that area. So for TxDOT, about well over 3/4 of the staff that we have are not subject to telework. They are our maintenance employees, our
so
engineers.
three-quarters are not.
Three-quarters are not. Three-quarters are not. So the remainder quarter of the staff have a varying degree of telework options, remote work options, depending upon the type of work that they do. So in some instances, if we have individuals that just have a little bit of flexibility to work from home 1 or 2 days a week, they're afforded that. But that is often set by their management. And one of the things that we do is we look at those telework policies and programs, want to first of all ensure that we are working as productively and efficiently as an organization as possible in the things that we do, and that we're also aligned with the standards and the policies of other state agencies so that there's some consistency and compatibility there.
Got it. Same question I directed to them at first on this issue of the request for whether it's 299 or 301 new FTEs. Help me understand how in your LAR we need 301 new FTEs, but we don't need any more money. You've got apparently a lot of cash sitting around. What's going on? How can you afford 301 new FTEs without an increase in the budget?
Yeah, let me address that. So we do have funding. So we manage our program based upon the funding that we have available. So as mentioned earlier, the LBB did report numbers, but they are expecting those numbers to go down. So as numbers go down, we will adjust our program accordingly. But what we have done is we've had record award in project development and delivery over the current biennium. And as you're aware, with transportation projects, those take anywhere 3 to 5 years in order to continue to pay out on those projects. But the revenues associated with the positions would be included within the appropriations request, but we would not be asking for general revenue to fund those positions.
Okay, but as you're requesting for a lot of more money from us, I just find it odd when someone's like, hey, we need 300 more new employees, but it'll come from somewhere else. It's an odd request.
Well,
I'd love to-
maybe I can help. When we look at that, and we will look at the employees that we might ask and make the decision to say, hey, look, we believe that we could utilize additional employees. We look at that really from two aims, because as you've pointed out, the amount of our funding doesn't change. So the ultimate goal is the delivery and being able to deliver as many projects as possible, as cost effectively as possible, and also to balance that out with the customer service needs as well. And so when we make that request, it's with an eye towards saying, okay, can this make us overall more efficient as a state agency and yield additional product? And that's when what we look at. And so a lot of what we're doing is oriented toward project staff to go toward project delivery efforts, staff to go through construction, engineering, and inspection
No,
efforts. We don't wanna miss
I
that.
get all that. It's just more like, I've been involved in large executive branch agencies, and like, hey, if I need 300 more FTEs for something that I've never seen it with, like, oh, but we got enough sitting around to cover the cost. It's an oddity. But I'm happy to follow up further offline with you on that, because I'd like to hit a couple other topics here. On the public transportation funding piece, do you have utilization that can really underpin the request for additional funding for this? Like, what systems are you talking about? And do we really have empirical data that could show like a massive increase in demand that would be commensurate with this? Because I mean, while I would recognize it's largely anecdotal, my experience with these systems is that they are nowhere near fully utilized right now. So do you have data that might paint a different picture?
We can share with you the data on the public transportation system utilization and just the operations of those systems in the rural and the urban areas. And that's what we're talking about, is these urban and rural areas. Many of those, I will say, are human services related systems, so oriented toward getting transit-dependent people to doctors, maybe getting them into the larger communities and getting them services that they would not be able to access otherwise. And so you probably will find that the utilization for these services, these transit systems are different than what you might see in a larger urban area because they have a different function.
Yeah, and on the rule one, if I read it right, it sounded like one of the justifications in there was to make you more competitive for federal grant making. But is it the case that we don't exactly know what the number is going to be. We have no clue if we're going to get the grant. There's a lot of things happening at the federal level, thank God, regarding federal grant making authorities and policies. Am I reading that right? You want a whole bunch more money so that you can be more competitive for a grant that we have no idea if we're going to get.
Well, there's $25 million in there that would go toward helping to be part of the state match that would go toward federal grants. And oftentimes when federal grants come out, if we don't have a state match to go along with them or a local match to go along with them, then we do have the ability to use transportation development credits as an offset to that, and I won't go into all the details of that, but I will just say that does tend to make us less competitive in being able to pull down those federal grants.
So what if we give you the $25 million and you don't get the federal grant? What happens to that $25 million?
We would still use it for that purpose. Based upon the numbers that we've seen, there's about a $20 million deficit per year. So this would go towards helping relieve that. But first, we would want to try to leverage other dollars in order to be able to maximize the use of that investment.
Okay. Let me switch gears somewhat dramatically, but also something that I was came across in reading the LAR that surprised me. So you're TxDOT, which stands for Texas Department of Transportation, correct?
That's right.
Y'all build roads,
Yes.
bridges,
Yes.
rail.
Yes,
You've got a civil rights division.
we do.
You have an Office of Civil Rights. Why?
Well, the Office of Civil Rights exists to administer programs that are governed by federal law and regulation and state law and regulation. Those include our disadvantaged business enterprise programs and our historically underutilized business programs. And I did see your tweet that you put out. Appreciate calling your attention to that. We ensured that website was updated to clearly clarify what that division does and their purposes of their function and how they interrelate with their counterparts at the federal level. They're within the USDOT. There's 6 different offices of civil rights that we have to work with because of the requirements in the administration of federal funds.
Well, yeah, I was going to bring the website up in a second, but since you raised it, I'll jump right into that. Because this is, and I printed out this morning, this is what the homepage for your Civil Rights Division at TxDOT looks like as of right now. But you alluded to something a second ago that maybe it didn't look like this very recently.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there have been changes to this website.
Yes, sir.
How recently?
They were made over the weekend.
Okay. Yeah, so, because this is pretty consistent with what you just said, although I do still want to come back to some of this, especially on the hubs, but 2 days ago, it looked like this. Is this accurate?
I believe that's, I can't read it from here, but
Yeah,
I
but
know
it
what
looked
you're
right.
referring to, and
So
I think
there,
you're holding it up.
what I've highlighted here is language that was on your website over the weekend, and I about fell out of my chair when I read this. So on the homepage of the TxDOT Civil Rights Division, you're bragging that the TxDOT, so our Department of Transportation, is promoting diversity and inclusion opportunities, and then explicitly engaged in affirmative action activities. What were you doing 2 days ago to promote diversity and inclusion and affirmative action?
Well, I want to first of all say, I appreciate you bringing that to my attention. And what we did was we wanted to review that and ensure that what is conveyed is consistent with what our mission is. As you know, or may be aware, the Governor Abbott about 3 months ago, or 3 weeks ago, issued an executive order that spoke to that and spoke to the importance of affirming that as an organization, we need to ensure that that the work that we do as an agency equally protects individuals under the law, and that's what we want to consistently do. And we want to remove any kind of terminology that might suggest otherwise. And so that was the intent, was to remove that terminology that would be construed or maybe confused with efforts that we don't do as a department.
No, yeah, and I very much appreciate the governor issuing that executive order. I do have a copy of it here in my hands. I have been, for months now, posting daily examples of our state agencies using taxpayer funds to promote DEI. And I very much appreciate the governor taking that action. But I have very real concerns, and I would love to understand, because you say clarifying terminology. I would like to know, what was TxDOT doing regarding DEI that led y'all to have this on the front page of your website?
Well, as I said before, we support the governor's executive order and his direction in that area. We're working to administer our programs consistent with that executive order and with federal and state law that covers that.
Okay.
Everything that we're doing is consistent with federal and state law.
And I appreciate that, but you can understand, like 30 hours ago, the website looked very differently. Although I certainly appreciate change, but I do want to know, like, were there any actual substantive changes? Like, were staff reprogrammed or retasked? Were staff eliminated?
I would say that what was outlined on that web page and how it was interpreted is a mischaracterization of what we do as an agency.
Okay, well, then okay. I want to talk about what you do as an agency, as in particular as the Civil Rights Division. How big is the Civil Rights Division?
Civil Rights Division has around 50 employees in it.
15 or 50?
50.
50
50.
FTEs. What's the budget?
The budget of that,
Yeah.
you have that?
We don't have that offhand, but we can provide that to you.
What's a swag?
I don't have that. I don't want to give you an inaccurate number, but happy to provide that number to you.
Yeah, I would say the budget The budget is around $5 million.
Okay, yeah, thank you, because it is in your LAR, this office. So around 5 million, you said?
Yes, sir.
And around 50 FTEs. What
No,
does...
I'm sorry, the FTE budget is probably around 5 million. The overall budget of what they do is around 10 million.
10
Yes.
on top of the 5?
I believe that that includes the 5,
Includes
but
the
we'll
5?
clarify that.
Okay,
with
so
you.
we're somewhere between $5 and $15 million.
Yes, sir.
I'm guessing it's on the higher end. Okay, so you said that the original, like, what was on your website over the weekend, again, first, like, homepage, top paragraph, first sentence. Half of it is just, we just mischaracterized what we're doing. So I would ask you, like, how would you characterize what the Civil Rights Division does? Like, what would be the top 1 or 2 bullets?
Well, I think as you see what's articulated on the website today, that's a fair characterization and a more accurate characterization of what
Okay.
they do. They administer our programs that are set forth in both federal and state law associated with the disadvantaged business enterprises and the historically underutilized businesses, but they also have other federally directed requirements. Most of these do come down from the federal level, and to date, those statutes and those regulations haven't changed.
Okay, so I hear that, and I appreciate that. But let's also talk about current, because you want to make a distinction between language that was on your website 30 hours ago versus what we're contemplating as a House committee today. I'm holding a copy of your LAR that is the most current LAR, the only one I've gotten, that we are all looking at as we sit here for the Civil Rights Division. The first 4 words of it, not buried somewhere, the first 4 words of your LAR that you have presented to this committee, I'm going to read them to you. The Civil Rights Division, again, the number one thing you say you're doing for us to fund you, promotes diversity, equity, and inclusion.
So that
But this was just somehow kind of a mischaracterization on your website, but it's the number one thing you send to us in your budget request. How can that be?
Well, it sounds like that was taken from the website or was captured from that. So I apologize.
Well, hang on.
It's a
So stuff. Well, hang on. We got a
mischaracterization.
far bigger problem if that's true, because you're telling me the stuff that you're submitting for your LARs is just some staffer pulled from a website that, by the way, had no basis in reality. And let me go further. Let me read the rest of the sentence to you. All right. Here's the rest of the sentence. Your LAR. Text dot. Civil Rights Division promotes inclusion, diversity, and equity, and accessibility in the internal and external operations of the department. The Civil Rights Division collaborates with districts, divisions, and external stakeholders to uphold these values through a variety of economic development programs for workforce and small businesses, blah, blah, blah. The entirety of your LAR, with the exception of you got to comply with the Civil Rights Act and the ADA, the entirety of your LAR is predicated on your internal and external operations to promote DEI. So please tell the committee what are some of those internal and external activities that you have been doing to promote DEI.
Well, I've addressed what our activities are, and those activities are consistent with state and federal law. I apologize that what you're seeing in the LAR might lead you to think otherwise.
So you're
you're
telling me right now that the Civil Rights Division was not doing anything to promote DEI.
Telling you right now that the work that our Civil Rights Division is consistent with state and federal law and programs, and I'll work to ensure that that continues to be the process.
Are you disputing that the entirety of your budget request for this 50-person FTE office is predicated on your promotional activities inside and outside the department on DEI?
I'm saying that would be a mischaracterization of it, yes. And I
What
apologize
would
if
what would be the implications of that for all your other LARs? How many of your LARs just came from some random staffer pulling language from your website that, again, is apparently, according to you, completely divorced from the activities of the department? What are the 50 FTEs doing? Because your entire LAR says they're doing DEI.
Well, I've covered what they're doing, sir.
Yeah, you've covered what you're telling me they're doing. It strains credulity, respectfully. But let's talk about some of the stuff that is still on your website that you've referenced here. Does TxDOT ever offer employment or make contract determinations to somebody, an individual or an entity that would not have received it otherwise but for any consideration regarding that individual or that entity's race?
Only as may be required under state and federal law.
So you may be doing it, but you're saying you may be required to do it by a statute.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so the state of Texas is apparently letting contracts and making employment decisions that are predicated on race. Did I hear you say that correctly?
I said we follow the law, sir.
And are doing it?
We follow the law.
Got it. Okay. Do you think it's legally and ethically appropriate for the Texas government to discriminate on individuals or businesses on the basis of their race?
Discrimination is wrong, sir.
But we are making employment determinations, as your testimony just elucidated to the committee, based on their race, as at least a factor.
Not employment determinations, no, sir.
Contracts.
Contracts as the law requires.
Got it. But so we are making contract determinations based on race in the state of Texas.
Based on
You're going to
state-
have to understand this is going to be very frustrating to me, and I think to many, many millions of Texans. So you said no employment determinations. That's your position, right?
Right.
Okay. Let's talk about contracts then. Roughly how many contracts have been let where race played at least some component in the determination to let that or to award that contract?
Based upon our latest hub report that goes to the comptroller under state law, the amount of contracting work that went to a variety of eligible hub entities, that includes racial, sex, and even veteran-owned, it's probably around $1 billion of the work that we contract.
$1 billion.
That's on the
$1 billion
it's on the
worth
comptroller's
of
website.
contracts, which, by the way, are paid for by my constituents, may have been awarded, at least in part, based on somebody's race.
Based on the law, both at the state and the federal level.
But you're either saying yes or you're at least not denying it. Okay, so that's happening, roughly about $1 billion. Does TxDOT, do you have any comparative analytics, any type of comparison or data to inform the taxpayers who are paying for all this? And by the way, I do not believe 30 million Texans support race-based contract determinations. And I can't say that more forcefully. Do we have any comparison of the cost to my constituents between like an average contract that would have been awarded based solely on merit versus the contracts that were let using race as a determination?
I'm not aware of any information on that.
No
sir.
idea. Would you guess that the contracts that were awarded based on something other than merit were more expensive or less expensive than contracts that were based?
I'm not able to speculate on that, sir.
No idea. I'm pretty sure anybody with some common sense knows they probably aren't lower, because there'd be no need then. So Texas taxpayers, but what I'm hearing here, are spending more money. Not only are we making determinations on the basis of race, we're probably spending more tax dollars than we otherwise would have to do so.
So let me just add one bit of information. So we do have
Please,
a low bid.
anything to help me with this.
Sure, absolutely. So we do have a low bid process. So if you look, as we noted, we have 89% of our funding goes towards project development delivery. Obviously, the biggest component of that is our highway construction contracts, and those are all low bid contracted amounts.
I appreciate it. I'm not sure that helps with the materiality of the issue of Texans being forced to have their tax dollars weaponized against their values by letting contracts on the basis of race. But thank you. How much in total would you say it costs TxDOT to administer all of your programs that apparently take race into some kind of a consideration?
Well, we've talked about what the budget is for the Civil Rights Division, so it would probably be captured in that.
For the administration piece. But in terms of contracts that were let under those, pursuant to those policies, I heard over $1 billion a second ago, right? Roughly?
Yes.
Okay. I just have to tell you, it's outrageous. I have a very hard time believing that the story that like your entire LAR is just made up. And I think I speak on behalf of millions of Texans who quite frankly are already overtaxed. I don't even know how many of my constituents are terrified they're going to lose their homes or their property. And the last thing they want, their tax dollars, which we take from them by force. The government, the state of Texas has no money. The only money we have is the people's money that we take from them by force. And the last thing they want to have done with their tax dollars is to have it weaponized against their values in the pursuant of facially racist DEI and or contract or employment practices, which it sounds like at least the vast majority of that, you're not even going to contest, has been happening at the Texas Department of Transportation. So I will plan to follow up with you and other members of your leadership team offline, but I appreciate you to be here today, but this is absolutely outrageous. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions? If they're not, I usually try to do my questions at the end, so give them. Mark, I'm going to go on some substantive issues here. Subject matters are a little different, but I just wanted to hit these before y'all leave. Y'all have added more lanes to the system.
We have, yes.
I'm sure LBB or you guys could help us, as these dollars are being expended, or as we're taking the dollars and letting contracts out, how many more roads we're building? You have that, right?
We do.
And in general, I guess it is safe to say we've added more roads to the system that we have to maintain. Is that correct?
Right. And I would also say that compared to the national totals over the past 5 or 6 years, we've probably added about a third of the lane miles that have been added to transportation systems in the United States here in Texas, thanks in part to the funding that you all have given us and just in response to a lot of the growth and demand that is coming to our state.
Correct, and I would say the voters as well, right? Because we passed 2 constitutional amendments,
100%.
1 and 7, is that?
Yes, sir.
And they didn't pass at the same time, I think.
They were offset by about a year,
Right.
but each of those passed by over 80%, and we appreciate that.
And so the voting public felt that infrastructure, transportation, whether it's congestion or connectivity, they thought it was important.
Yes, sir.
The voters thought it was important to expend those resources and utilize constitutionally dedicated dollars to maintain the system. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. I want to talk specifically about a rider we had, and y'all worked with us on the heavy duty charging task force. So I just want to say, thank you guys for helping implement the rider. Obviously, it's related to the Electric Truck Advisory Council and House Bill 14, I'm dyslexic, 1846. And so I just wanted to ask you guys, are there any plans, or if you're aware, for incorporating either electric charging stations or hydrogen fueling stations into the heavy-duty truck stops that TxDOT maintains?
We don't have any separate plans for that other than what has been established by rider or specifically funded by the federal government.
Okay. And then are there, if we're not going to do that, do we anticipate planning that out so that we do have the infrastructure in place as far as the placement of these particular charging stations, particularly for heavy and light duty trucks?
We have a state EV plan
Right.
that is currently under re-review by USDOT.
And that's in conjunction with our federal partners, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And it's separate than any other charging station at a convenience store, or are they together?
Well, we certainly consider,
Right.
the location of those
Right.
and the availability of those as you go through the planning process,
Okay.
but that would be separate.
Okay. And I look forward to working with you guys. I know we did this rider last session, and I appreciate you guys' work on that. I hate to pick on FAR, but that was going to be my, but it was a good thing that they got their bridge. I think they got a bridge partly funded by state
Right.
resources.
Yes, sir.
Right, because I think it was about 40 or 50 mil. We put in 20, I believe, correct?
Yes, and it was general revenue funded.
Correct.
Correct.
And so my question is, in general, along the border, look, I don't represent the border, but I am a member of this committee, subcommittee, and so I think I get a chance to represent all Texans the best way I can, coming from Houston. As it relates to transportation, infrastructure along the border, FAR comes to mind. I guess the inspection station in Presidio, I think we did some resources down there or over there.
Yes, sir.
Does the agency have a plan, particularly for the efficient cross-border, whether it's commerce or people, do we have a plan to address the infrastructure needs along the border? You have Laredo has a long rail. Speaking of rail, we have huge rail,
Right.
and largest inland port probably in the country. El Paso, very unique, way out there, but has
Absolutely.
one of the largest cross-border systems in the world. Obviously, Presidio. You have Maverick County. You have Del Rio, Acuña in that area. Hidalgo County, Cameron County. Do we have, in talking to some of the members of the border communities, do we have a plan to address the efficient flow of people and commerce in conjunction, obviously, with our federal partners?
We do. We have what's called our Border Trade Master Plan, and that is developed through and in concert with our Border Trade Advisory Committee. The Border Trade Advisory Committee is another legislatively established committee that includes representatives of those border areas. It is chaired by the Secretary of State, and so we support those efforts through TxDOT. And what's that's geared to do is to bring together all of those needs, because most of those, with the exception of Presidio, all of the other bridges that cross the border, if they're rail bridges, they're owned privately by the rail companies, but the other bridges are owned by the local communities themselves. And so you're really talking about a number of different stakeholders that come together when it involves border trade activities. And so through that Border Trade Advisory Committee, we have a chance to fully understand the activities that are going on in each of those locations, and then to also help inform us and our commission on the infrastructure needs that are associated with them, and kind of begin to help us put priorities to those infrastructure needs and those investments that we typically will be making on our highway system.
Right, because you have I-69 that it is supposed to connect, obviously, the north-south interior U.S., but also connect to interior Mexico to get down to commerce and folks and trade down in southern Mexico. Are we working with our international partners to make sure we're coordinating bridge crossings? Because obviously at Laredo you have 2 bridges. Well, I think you have 3.
Yes.
Because you have one that's truck, one more pedestrian and everyday.
2 commercial, two that are commercial,
Right.
3 that all together.
And the amount of traffic that folks have to wait in
Absolutely.
line crossing over in either direction. I do hear from stakeholders about somehow the need to better that system from an infrastructure perspective. Do you have any insight on that?
Absolutely, and there's additional bridges that are in the planning process, not only in the Laredo area, but in El Paso and South Texas. The thing that we try to do, and you mentioned Interstate 69, very important connection to Laredo, also a connection to Brownsville and
Right.
McAllen as well, because I-69 splits into 3 segments.
Correct.
So the development and the sequencing of that is closely aligned with some of the development that we're aware of that occurs on the south side of the border into Mexico. A lot of traffic coming up from Monterrey, primarily directed toward Laredo, but also Coahuila and others that are now going to Presidio and Eagle Pass. All of those influence these corridors. So in addition to I-69, we've got the existing corridor of I-35, which continues to be the
Correct.
workhorse. And then you've got corridors like the Ports to Plains corridor, I-27, that have connections to Laredo in South Texas and also to even to Presidio.
Do we have a dollar amount on each of those particular? Because each one of them would take specific dollars. Do we have a?
We do. It's
ballpark?
very big. It's
Yeah.
very big. It's going to be a long-term effort to fully see all of those corridors develop and materialize over time. And, the I-69 corridor goes back over 30 years when it was originally planned. And we're continuing to make investments. We've made significant investments, but we still have much more to go in those areas. But it's a significantly large number when you're just talking about those three corridors: I-35, Ports to Plains, and I-69.
And would you say that improving the infrastructure road-wise, congestion-wise along those bridges also helps with our border security?
Yes, absolutely, I believe so. When you've got trucks that are congested and backed up, I think the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol would tell you that when trucks are stopped, waiting to go across the border, particularly northbound trucks, that poses a security risk. If a truck is moving, less of a risk.
Right, because but I guess you would need to put dollars along these bridges from a state perspective. You would hope you would get some federal dollars as well, but these huge, as I understand it, these huge X-ray machines that were being proposed in the previous border security bill in the previous administration, that coordination would have been helpful in one, not stymie commerce, right? Because Mexico is our largest as a state. Mexico is our largest trading partner, but particularly to interdict or at least detect contraband or whatnot coming across. Is that safe to say?
Yes, sir. And when we work with our local partners in those efforts, in the planning and the work that goes into those bridge programs, and when the state may contribute funding to that as well, one of the things that we closely coordinate those projects with is with U.S. Customs and Border Protections, along with the Department of Public Safety that also has an important inspection role with the vehicles themselves. And so in these programs to improve the capacity of the bridges, there's also typically investment that goes toward enhancing the capacity and the effectiveness of those security and inspection operations, both at the federal and the state level.
Okay, and I want to switch gears because in keeping with ports, but a different type of port. We're talking about kind of land ports. I couldn't let you leave on these next two issues I need to talk about because I do represent Houston.
Yes, sir.
And the last session, and we did the 400 mil in GR, I believe, for port capital improvement projects, but it's not. I think there was only two ports that were able to get resource, or is it 200 mil? I think it was 200 mil and two.
For the Ship Channel Revolving Fund,
Right.
that was the deepening and widening of the ports. There were two.
Right.
But yes, for the $400 million for the capital infrastructure program, I believe there were 12 ports that received funding
Okay.
for that, for the $400 million.
Because I know, the folks that I represent are anxious and wanted to figure out how we that would be obviously a decision of this body. But do you have any thoughts on why we wouldn't put more dollars to port initiatives?
Well, that as you said, that
Yeah.
would be a decision of the body. I can tell you that the funding that you all have directed, the $400 million for the deepening and widening, that the current request for this biennium is $200 million, and then the $900 million for the port capital program. All of those are oriented toward helping to ensure that our ports remain as competitive and efficient as possible. And I think the ports, if they were here to testify, would advocate that those investments help produce jobs and help ensure that that commerce continues to flow through our Texas ports and serve our Texas businesses.
Some of the dollars on the deepening and widening, I think there was two, Port Neches and Brownsville.
Yes, sir.
I think those are the two that were able to get
Yes.
resources, obviously we have many other ports, small, medium-sized ones, but obviously Port of Houston is one that many of us care about. There's also roads along those ports that need assistance as well, and it takes dollars for those. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct.
I know in and around Barber's Cut, and then obviously along the Houston Ship Channel, closer in, up the channel, we need those dollars to be able to maintain the roads because there's just a lot of heavy truck traffic.
Yes, sir.
Along those roads.
Yes, sir.
And speaking of those roads, and this would be my hopefully my last question here, or a series of questions relating to the Port of Houston, the Houston Ship Channel, as I understand it, the Ship Channel Bridge, also known as the City Sherman Bridge. Is that bridge under construction, or will that bridge be under construction at some point?
It is planned as a future construction program, future construction project. That would be the 610 bridge, as you said, over the Houston Ship Channel. Our district has undertaken a preliminary feasibility study for that, the next step in the process, and that was the size and the scope of that project. And I don't have the actual cost with me today, but the next step in that process would be to begin to work with the Houston Galveston Area Council, the MPO, to introduce that project into their long-range plan, which is financially constrained, so you have to kind of make it fit. And then that would enable us as an agency to move forward with the environmental studies that would be required for that, and then begin to work on building the actual funding that would be part of that reconstruction effort and widening effort.
Okay, I want to suggest just as a, and I know you do this for other big projects, and we could take I-45 North, that could be its own committee, subcommittee of a committee, and we don't have to go there today, but with any plans to reconstruct that bridge, if you could take some of the stakeholders around there, some of the communities that are, these exit ramps that are right. You got communities that are right abut the port and the petrochemical industry. What we don't want to see is these neighborhoods being impacted, whether with idling trucks or big trucks going into small little neighborhoods in Pleasantville or Galena Park or Manchester or, most of that East End, Houston, Second Ward, Magnolia Park. Just some of those communities that they're kind of, I don't want to say they're used to that activity, but they've grown up along that corridor of the port, and just so that they can get buy-in from you guys, I would just want y'all to work with them.
Yes, sir.
So that there's no unintended consequences, and just for, and if you work with our city and county and our Port of Houston, that'd be great. And just lastly, on just a point of personal privilege, my grandfather worked on that bridge in the probably 60s, I believe. I don't know if Brown and Root got the contract to build the bridge, or not. He said they started on both sides of the channel and met at the top. And so I have a picture of him. He's since passed. He passed at 91 years old. But I have a picture of him on top of the bridge, and he said he was scared for his life because there was not a lot of, I don't know if OSHA was around or whatever, but there was not a lot of safety precautions at the time. So every time I go over that bridge, I think of my grandfather because he literally helped build that bridge with his hand. He was a welder, welding steel along that bridge. So just wanted to throw that out to you. And then I look forward to working with you on other issues that
Yes,
we don't have to discuss here, but you know which ones they are.
We understand.
And so just appreciate the work that you guys are doing to help our roads and bridges and whatnot. So Representative Collier.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Just have a few follow-up questions. In regards to the funding, you get federal funding, and 30% of your revenue is from the federal government. Is that right?
Yes.
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 Correct.
And so your LAR, when was that submitted?
So we started working on it back in February of last year is when we started working on that process. So it takes quite a bit of time in order to work up to this in working within the department. And then ultimately, in August, we'll submit it to the commission for final adoption, and then we send it to the LBB after that.
Okay, so the documents that were prepared months ago, is that right?
Absolutely.
All right. And so when you get federal funding, you have to comply with federal laws and regulations, rules and regulations, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And in order to get the dollars, you have to comply with the rules and the laws for
That's
the federal government. So one of the things that the federal government requires is a disadvantaged business enterprise, that some of the funding that you get for the road projects have to go to a DBE, is that right?
We have to prepare a DBE plan and set DBE goals under current federal law. And as we administer our construction and contracting program, we have to align with that plan and those goals.
Sure, and according to the U.S. Department of Transportation, a DBE is a small for-profit business that's at least 51% owned and controlled by socially and economically disadvantaged individuals. So I started looking up. I was like, what is a socially and economically disadvantaged individual? And it's somebody who has faced barriers based on their race, ethnicity, cultural, or economic position. And so I started thinking, you know, women are considered and can qualify for DBEs if they are 51%.
That's correct.
And I looked and I saw that women weren't able to apply for credit on their own until 1974. So that makes them a disadvantaged business enterprise because they have been socially and economically disadvantaged. So women are part of the DBE program, right?
Yes.
All right. And so in order for you to get 30% of your funding, you have to have a program in place like the DBE. And the last time I checked, that's still there. That has not been removed. Is that right?
The federal law and the regulations that govern that program have been unchanged.
All right. And so when I looked at your website, I saw pictures, and it looks like the same pictures that were shown today. Black man, disabled, white individual, a woman, 2 women. And so these are individuals who would potentially be eligible for a DBE program.
Potentially, I think that, you know, they're pictures that I think the
representative
team,
of what the
intended to be
DBE.
representative of some of what they do.
Okay. And so your program does the same thing it did today that it did yesterday, and that's to promote and help the disadvantaged business enterprise.
We administer those programs as set forth by federal law and in state law, because the state law covers the HUB program, which is historically underutilized businesses.
And so does that program say that you don't have to be qualified to do the work?
There is a qualification and a certification process. That's
So
correct.
they have to be qualified regardless of race, ethnicity, or cultural.
They all have to be qualified. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So even if I am a disadvantaged business enterprise, I have to be qualified to do the work that I'm seeking. Is that right?
That's correct.
And that's in any area of what you're letting out. You have to be qualified.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So they are there because they meet the eligibility requirements of the DBE and they're qualified to do the work.
That's correct.
That's all I needed. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
Members, any other questions? Gentlemen, I thank you for your
Chairman.
patience, and I'm sure members would want to talk to you individually, and I appreciate you guys.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you,
Thank you,
members
sir.
of the committee. We appreciate it.
Thank you.